"Tomorrow, Littleton, you better bring something good, or we're taking whatever we want again." That was the vibe. He was the quiet kid largely ignored, until the very bullies who'd been swiping his lunch for weeks ended up sick, embarrassed, and too terrified to ever meet his gaze again. It all began with an empty locker and a rumbling stomach. Jamari Littleton stood before locker 214, staring into the void as if his lunch might miraculously reappear, just like it hadn't the day before and the day before that. The brown paper bag his mom had carefully packed that morning? Vanished. The sandwich, the apple slices, the granola bar, the small blue sports drink. All gone again. He didn't move, just stared. No outburst, no sigh, just a blank expression. Jamari wasn't the complaining type. At 14 he'd already grasped that speaking up often yielded no results, especially when you weren't loud, popular, or part of a clique. He'd transferred to Willow Ridge High only 3 months prior. Even though he kept to himself, he wasn't completely unseen. He was the kid with the deep voice, always carrying a sketchpad, the one who knew every basketball stat but never tried out for the team. He sat alone at lunch, seemingly unfazed. But Jamari wasn't shy. He simply understood spaces, understood people, when to speak and when to remain silent. He'd learned this watching his mom charm and honesty her way out of overdue rent. School, though, wasn't like real life. It had its own harsher, quieter, sharper rules. He slowly closed the locker and walked away, clutching his books tight to his chest. In the cafeteria, he settled at the furthest table by the vending machines, a forgotten corner, perfect for solitude. He pulled out a pencil, sketching the vending machine's curved vents, just to keep his hands busy, to distract from the gnawing hunger. Then he heard it. "Man, someone's mom packing them gourmet lunches. I might steal it again tomorrow." The voice was too close. Jamari didn't look up. He recognized it. Trent Mallory, junior varsity football, blonde shampoo commercial curls, and a mouth that never quit. His usual shadows trailed him. Chad Keener, perpetually wearing Oakley shades indoors like sunlight, was his nemesis. And Bryce Wexler, with his artificially deep voice and incessant gum chewing. Laughter followed. Not the genuine kind, but the kind that accompanies humiliation. Quiet enough to deny, loud enough to sting. Jamari's pencil stilled. So it wasn't a mistake. Not a locker mix-up, not a janitor's error. This was their game and he was the punchline. He tightened his grip on the pencil until it snapped. Still he said nothing, simply smoothed the broken edges and kept drawing with the remainder. The worst part wasn't the stolen food or even the humiliation. It was the realization that those around him either didn't notice or noticed and simply didn't care. He recalled the first incident just 2 weeks into school. His turkey sandwich gone. He'd assumed he'd forgotten it. The next day the fruit cup. Then the entire lunch bag. Again and again. Always around the same time, right before fourth period. The school was large, over 1,200 students, and the locker hallways were mostly empty during transitions, easy targets. He never confronted anyone. What would he say? "Hey, did you steal my sandwich?" That would just give them more to mock. And his mom, she packed those lunches with such care, even writing his name on the napkin sometimes. She worked all day at the DMV, came home exhausted, yet still made time to pack his lunch the night before. If she knew someone was stealing it just to be cruel, it would break her heart. He didn't tell her. He didn't tell anyone. He just sat there, chewing on the inside of his cheek, pretending he wasn't starving while the scent of cafeteria fried chicken wafted mockingly. But that afternoon, walking home under the blazing Florida sun, he made a silent vow. This wouldn't happen again. Not like this. Not with him doing nothing. Friday arrived quickly, bringing another empty locker. Jamari didn't even check this time, he knew. He walked past it as if it didn't exist, but his stomach had other plans, growling like a long-neglected caged dog. He clutched his hoodie tighter, trying to muffle the sound. In math class he couldn't focus. Mr. Penn droned on about integers and polynomials, but Jamari's mind was fixated on the thin film of sweat on his neck and his lightheadedness. That and the whispers, "Bro, that turkey yesterday smacked. I told you that kid's mom goes hard with the sandwiches. You see the napkin? Yeah, with the heart on it. Joe. Like he's in preschool." They were 2 rows behind him. He didn't need to look back. He knew it was Trent Mallory, his voice carrying that fake sweetness people use when they know they can get away with anything. Bryce Wexler chimed in, his voice low and mocking, drawing a spit-choking laugh from Chad Keener. Jamari sat frozen, jaw tight, but he didn't flinch, didn't turn. He just stared at the equation on the board as if it made perfect sense, as if he heard nothing. But inside something was shifting. After class he remained seated while the others left. He waited until the hallway thinned, then slowly made his way to his locker. And there it was. A small note tucked into the vent. No envelope, no distinct handwriting, just 2 words scrawled in black Sharpie. Thanks again. He stared at it for a few seconds, then crumpled it in his fist. That evening at home he claimed he wasn't hungry, telling his mom he'd had a big lunch. She smiled, kissed his forehead, and told him to save room for tomorrow. She was trying a new sandwich spread she'd seen online. He forced a smile and excused himself to his room. He lay on his bed for a long time, watching the ceiling fan's slow, lazy rotations. His stomach growled again, but he didn't care. His mind was louder. It wasn't just the food anymore. It was the message. They were laughing at him not just for what he lacked but for what he possessed. A mother who loved him enough to pack his lunch with care, for eating alone, for existing in a space where he didn't seamlessly blend in. That's when he began taking mental notes. Timing, patterns, which hallway was emptiest during third period, who always vanished after second. He kept his head down but his eyes were wide open, observing. One day he lingered in the science wing, pretending to tie his shoe. Trent walked by with Bryce, and Jamari watched as Bryce casually slipped something into his back pocket. A paper lunch bag. His lunch bag. He didn't follow, didn't confront. He just watched them laugh their way down the hall as if they owned the place. The next morning, Jamari woke earlier than usual. He sat at the kitchen table while his mom packed his lunch, trying out that new turkey and sweet pepper mayo spread. "You better not trade this one," she said, smiling as she carefully folded the bag. "It's a winner." He offered a hollow smile in return. She tucked the sandwich into a brown paper bag, added apple chips and a juice pouch. As usual, she grabbed a napkin and wrote a note. "Have a great day. Love you always, Mom." He stared at it for a second longer than usual before she tucked it inside. Then she looked at him, hesitated, and asked, "You okay, baby?" He nodded. "Just tired." She kissed his cheek and let him go. Jamari walked to school that day with a different kind of weight on his back. Not just books, not just hunger. A plan was taking shape. Because now it wasn't a question. He knew who was doing it, he knew why, and more importantly, he knew they believed he'd never do anything about it. But he wasn't planning to complain anymore. He was planning to make them remember the day they picked the wrong kid's lunch. By Monday morning, Jamari wasn't hungry. He wasn't angry either. He was focused. He didn't stop at his locker, didn't even glance at it. He walked straight to the front office, his backpack hanging low over one shoulder. He asked to speak to Mr. Haverson, the assistant principal. The secretary raised an eyebrow but made the call. 5 minutes later, Jamari sat in a cold plastic chair in a small office that smelled of air freshener and burnt coffee. Mr. Haverson, a heavy-set man with thinning hair and a shiny forehead, leaned back in his chair, chewing on a pen cap as if already annoyed. "So," he said, lacing his fingers over his stomach, "what's going on?" Jamari met his gaze. "Someone's been stealing my lunch." Haverson blinked, then chuckled softly. "Stealing your lunch? As in from your locker?" "Yes." "For how long?" Jamari paused. 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Haverson repeated, dragging the words out as if they tasted sour. "And you're just now saying something?" Jamari's jaw tightened. "I didn't think it'd keep happening." Mr. Haverson leaned forward, his chair groaning under his weight. "Look, kid, lockers get open sometimes. Kids forget to shut them or they don't turn the dial all the way. You sure this isn't just a misunderstanding?" "It's not." "Any proof?" Jamari shook his head. "Not yet." Haverson let out a sigh that felt rehearsed. "I'll let campus security know. They'll keep an eye on that hallway. Best I can do for now." Jamari nodded, even though he knew that meant nothing. He stepped out of the office and started walking toward his locker, already hearing footsteps behind him. "Snitch," someone muttered under their breath. Probably Chad. He always reeked of Axe body spray and corn chips. Jamari didn't turn around. Later that day during gym, Jamari pulled Coach Renner aside. He was one of the few black teachers at the school. Tall, strict, serious. Jamari thought just maybe Coach would care more than Haverson. "They're stealing my lunch," Jamari said, voice low. "Every day." Coach narrowed his eyes. You tell administration? I did. Nothing happened. Renner looked at him for a long second, then rubbed his beard. You got names. Jamari hesitated. Renner sighed. Look, if you're sure it's happening, that sucks. I know how kids can be. But unless we catch somebody doing it, there's not much I can do either. He patted Jamari on the shoulder as if that would magically fix things. You might want to start bringing it with you. Keep it in your bag or eat it early. Eat it early. Like hiding was a solution. Jamari stared at the gym floor. Okay. He didn't go back to class right away. He ducked into the boys' bathroom and locked himself in the last stall, sitting on the toilet lid with his backpack in his lap, pulling his hoodie up over his head. He wasn't crying. He was calculating. He could have yelled. Could have told his mom. Gone home and skipped school altogether. But that's what they expected. That's what they wanted. To push until he snapped, then sit back and act shocked when he exploded. That's when it clicked. This wasn't about the sandwich. It wasn't even about him, really. It was about power. It was about making him feel small. So he started thinking like them. At home that night, he sat in his room and opened a new page in his sketchbook. But he didn't draw. He wrote. He made a list, what they don't expect. That I'm watching. That I'm smarter than them. That I'll wait. That I'll do something quiet. That I won't break. He closed the book and stared out the window. His mom was laughing in the kitchen, talking on the phone. He could hear her saying his name, probably bragging about his last art project, probably smiling while he planned something dark. He didn't like the way it felt, but he liked the idea of letting them feel even half of what he'd been feeling. If the adults weren't going to do anything, then he'd take care of it himself. And it wouldn't be a conversation next time. Thursday felt different. It wasn't the heat or even the hunger. It was the way Trent looked at him that morning as they crossed paths by the water fountains between second and third period. That smug half-smile, like he owned Jamari, like it was all some grand joke. He didn't even speak, just bumped Jamari's shoulder as he passed, walking on as if Jamari were invisible. That bump. That was the final straw. He didn't flinch. He didn't say a word. But inside something snapped. By fourth period, Jamari sat in the back of English class, staring out the window while Miss Dorsey read aloud from a book nobody cared about. His desk was clean, his hands still, but his mind buzzed with a single thought. They're laughing at me. Not just for what they were doing, but for thinking he wouldn't fight back, for thinking they could continue without consequence, that he'd stay quiet, that he'd just keep skipping lunch and sketching vending machines like some invisible loser. And honestly, he had for too long. Every humiliation, every crumpled napkin he found in the hallway, every half-eaten apple left inside his locker with teeth marks still showing, every barely hidden whisper behind his back. It had all built into something dense and sharp, sitting right behind his ribs. And now it was about to emerge. He stayed after class. Miss Dorsey barely noticed. He waited until the hallway was nearly empty before heading to his locker. It was gone again, of course. But this time, taped inside the empty locker was a photo. A photo printed from someone's phone. It was a picture of his lunch, opened, torn apart, someone holding it up like a trophy, a blurry hand giving a thumbs up in the background. On the back, someone had written, "Got anything better tomorrow?" Jamari stared at it without blinking. His breath slowed. His heart didn't race. He felt nothing. He folded the photo neatly, slipped it into his pocket and walked to class. At home that evening, he didn't wait for his mom to start making lunch. He got there first. While she was folding laundry in the other room, Jamari stood in the kitchen alone. The counter was clean, the fridge buzzed softly behind him. He pulled out the turkey, the sandwich rolls, the mayo. Then he opened a small Ziploc bag from his backpack. Inside, carefully wrapped in another baggie, was the dead cockroach he'd found behind the school dumpsters on Tuesday. He'd placed it in the freezer inside a marked art supplies container so no one would touch it. He unwrapped it carefully, slid it into the middle of the sandwich just under the turkey slices. Then he sealed it all up tight. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a tiny bottle of chocolate laxative, bought with the last few bucks he had at a gas station down the street. It looked exactly like Hershey's syrup. He unscrewed the cap and tipped it gently into the sports drink, stirred it with a plastic knife, wiped everything clean. He wrapped the sandwich exactly the way his mom did, neatly folded the bag twice, even added a napkin blank this time. His hands weren't shaking. He moved like he was working on a school project, like it was just another drawing. Except this one would be felt instead of seen. His mom walked in a few minutes later and smiled when she saw the packed lunch on the counter. "Wow, you're getting ahead of me now." Jamari nodded. "Figured I'd try something new." She ruffled his hair and kissed his cheek. "That's my boy." That night he barely slept, not from nerves but from anticipation. A strange sense of peace settled in the pit of his stomach, the same place hunger used to reside. He wasn't worried about getting caught because they never thought twice when they took his lunch. And tomorrow they'd take it again. But this time it wouldn't taste like victory. It would taste like the beginning of the end. Friday morning was quiet. The air was heavy, humid, thick, as if trying to slow everything down. Jamari didn't mind, he moved with purpose. He left the house 10 minutes earlier than usual, backpack slung over one shoulder, headphones on with no music playing, just something to keep people from talking to him. The brown paper bag was tucked carefully inside the side pocket of his bag, exactly where they always found it. He didn't touch his locker when he got to school. Instead, he went straight to the second-floor bathrooms near the math wing. It was one of the few places on campus where you could stall without drawing questions. He waited there until the first bell rang and the hallways began to thin. Then he walked back toward his locker. It was go time. He opened locker 214 slowly, just as he always did, reached into his backpack and pulled out the bag. The sandwich and drink were still cool from the fridge. No leaks, no smells, just a regular lunch like any other. He placed the bag gently at the front of the locker, easy to grab in plain sight. Then without hesitation he closed the door and walked away. No hesitation, no second guessing. He didn't know if they'd take it immediately or wait until second period as usual, but he didn't care. He just needed them to take it one last time. Back in class he tried to focus on the lesson, something about ecosystems and food chains. Fitting in a way, he thought. He considered where he fit on the school's food chain. Somewhere near the bottom, or perhaps not for long. He heard nothing all period. No laughs, no whispers, no clues. But by third period he spotted Chad and Bryce walking into history class late, laughing too hard. Chad wiped something from his lip. Bryce clutched his stomach as if it hurt from laughter or something else. Jamari kept his eyes forward. Then came lunch. He walked into the cafeteria with the same quiet, careful pace he always had, sat in his usual spot near the vending machines, opened his sketch pad. He didn't draw. He just watched. Across the room, Trent was at his usual table, surrounded by his usual people. Loud, confident. But something was off. He looked pale, his eyes glassy. He kept swallowing hard and shifting in his seat. Bryce wasn't even at the table. Chad sat slumped over his tray, barely touching his food. Jamari checked the time. Exactly 12 minutes after the bell. Then it started. Bryce burst through the cafeteria doors from the hallway, clutching his stomach, a wild look in his eyes. He didn't stop, just kept moving straight for the exit on the other side. Someone called his name, he didn't respond. Chad stood up suddenly, knocking his tray to the floor. He gagged audibly, then stumbled toward the trash cans, hand clamped over his mouth. Someone yelled. People laughed. Trent tried to stand but wobbled. He gripped the table as if it were the only thing keeping him from falling. His face was slick with sweat. He looked around as if disoriented. A teacher spotted him and walked over. There was a brief exchange, then Trent nodded barely and followed him out, slow, head down. The cafeteria buzzed with chaos. Everyone tried to figure out what was happening. Some were laughing, others recording. A few kids whispered rumors that Bryce had puked behind the gym. Someone said he'd nearly passed out in the hallway. Jamari just sat there, still, calm, watching it all unfold like a scene on a TV screen. No one looked at him. No one even remembered he existed. Perfect. The bell rang. Lunch was over. He closed his sketchbook, zipped up his bag and stood. As he walked past Trent's table, he noticed something lying on the floor beneath the bench. A brown paper bag torn open. He didn't stop. He just kept walking. Back in class, nobody said a word to him. No one would. But somewhere in that school, 3 boys were sitting in bathrooms or nurses' offices, realizing that maybe, just maybe, they'd messed with the wrong kid. 6th period was the quietest it had ever been. Not classroom quiet, the kind where the teacher drones on and half the class pretends to take notes. No, this was different. The school felt like it had lost something, like someone had pulled a plug and everything just slowed down. Mr. Laurie, the social studies teacher, tried to power through his lesson on Reconstruction-era amendments. But the students weren't really listening. Eyes kept darting to the door. Phones buzzed in laps. heads tilted as whispers passed from one desk to another. Bryce hadn't returned. Chad was reportedly still in the nurse's office. And Trent? Word had spread that he'd been taken out in a wheelchair after nearly fainting in the main hallway. No one knew exactly what happened, but everyone had theories. Food poisoning, someone muttered behind Jamari. Nah bro, I heard they ate something nasty like moldy meat or something. One kid leaned over and said, I bet someone did it on purpose. Jamari didn't respond. He didn't even blink. He stared straight ahead at the projection screen, one hand under his chin, pretending to care about the lesson while his other hand traced tiny shapes in the margins of his notebook. Nobody connected the dots. Nobody even looked at him. Which made sense because when people look at someone every day and don't see them, they don't notice when that person is the one pulling the strings. It was almost laughable. He'd expected a mess, maybe even to get called into the office. But nothing happened. Not a glance, not a single question. They were all too busy chasing rumors. During 7th period, someone said Bryce had thrown up behind the gym and collapsed near the bleachers. Another kid said Chad had tried to drive himself home and didn't make it past the front office before his stomach gave out. Trent was last seen holding onto the hallway lockers like he was seasick. Each version was more dramatic than the last, but nobody mentioned Jamari's name. That was the beauty of it. They'd treated him like a ghost for weeks, took from him without asking, laughed at him behind his back, assumed he'd just keep taking it. No. Now they were dealing with the one lunch that fought back. Jamari walked through the last hallway of the day with a calm that surprised even him. The sun had started pouring through the windows at just the right angle, casting long shadows on the floor. His sneakers squeaked against the tile as he passed a group of freshmen whispering about what had happened during lunch. One girl looked up, locked eyes with him for a second, then looked away. That was new. He stopped by his locker not because he needed anything but because he could. For the first time in weeks, it was undisturbed. No missing bag, no mocking notes, no chewed-up granola wrappers. He opened it slowly, then shut it just as slow. That click of the lock sounded like victory. He didn't feel triumphant. He didn't grin. This wasn't about gloating. It wasn't about revenge. It was about balance. About making things even. As he headed for the exit, he passed one of the janitors wheeling a mop bucket toward the gym hallway. The man muttered, "What the hell happened over there?" Jamari kept walking. Outside, the air was still thick, humid, but it didn't cling to him the way it had before. He walked down the cracked sidewalk with his bag slung low, earbuds in but no sound playing. Cars honked in the distance, a lawn mower buzzed somewhere nearby. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel hungry. He didn't feel watched. He didn't feel powerless. He felt even. But the real payoff wasn't what happened that day. It was what stopped happening every day after. Monday arrived as it always did, too soon, too loud, and unapologetic. But this time something felt different. When Jamari walked through the double doors at Willow Ridge High, it wasn't just the air conditioning or the rows of identical lockers. It was the way the hallway paused when he passed. Not froze, not stared, just paused as if people who never noticed him were suddenly aware of his presence, if only for a second. He walked to his locker, bag heavy, hoodie up, and reached for the dial. Still locked. Still untouched. He opened it slowly, peered inside. His lunch was right there, whole, untouched. No torn bag, no missing drink, no stupid note. That had never happened on a Monday. And as he stood there, still and quiet, someone passed behind him and muttered, "Yo, that's him." He turned slightly. Two freshmen, one with wide eyes, the other with a grin that spoke of respect. Then they vanished into the crowd. Jamari closed the locker. During second period, the rumors picked up steam again. Someone claimed Trent had spent the entire weekend throwing up and missed a big football scrimmage. Bryce hadn't responded to anyone's text since Friday. Chad apparently posted a cryptic message on Snapchat. "Watch what you eat." Nobody mentioned Jamari, but the energy had shifted. And at lunch, that's where it became obvious. He sat at his usual spot, the far left table by the vending machines, sketchbook open, pen in hand, quiet, unbothered. He'd just finished shading the shadow of a sneaker when he saw them. Trent, alone, walking stiffly as if his insides were still sore. No jokes, no swagger, just a tray of plain fries and a water bottle. No friends flanking him. Chad was a few tables back, sitting with some sophomores he'd never talked to before, silent. Bryce wasn't in the cafeteria at all. And none of them came near Jamari. They didn't even look in his direction. But he looked at them. He watched the way Trent kept glancing at his tray as if the fries might betray him. How Chad kept shifting in his seat, fidgeting as if he couldn't sit still. How everyone else at their usual table had scattered, eating elsewhere. There was no confrontation, no apology, no revenge fantasy playing out with fists or screams. Just silence. The kind of silence that happens when people finally realize they're not untouchable, that they messed with the wrong one. Jamari took a sip of his drink and let his eyes drift back to his sketchbook. That's when Mr. Haverson walked by, clipboard in hand, checking tables for stragglers or phone violations. He paused briefly near Jamari as if about to say something but then didn't. Just kept walking. Coach Renner passed by later, gave him a subtle look, almost a nod, but not quite. Recognition maybe, but no words. That suited Jamari just fine. The bell rang. He closed the book, slid his pencil into the spiral, stood and walked out like it was any other day. But everyone else in that cafeteria knew it wasn't. In the hallway between classes, someone even pulled him aside. A girl from his biology class he'd never spoken to. "Hey," she said awkwardly, brushing her braids back. "Is it true what happened to those guys? You know, with the food?" Jamari blinked, then shrugged. "Don't know what you're talking about." He smiled a little, impressed. "Right." She walked away. Jamari kept moving. By the time he reached the next class, the hallway chatter had shifted again. Teachers were cracking down on locker security. Some were calling for cameras in certain hallways. Someone said a parent threatened to sue after their kid got sick. But none of that landed on Jamari. There was no evidence, no confession, no witness. Just an ordinary brown bag lunch on a Friday that ended the game they'd been playing for weeks. But while they were busy dealing with the consequences, Jamari was already steps ahead, walking freely, finally in control of his space again. By Wednesday, Willow Ridge High had moved on, at least on the surface. The administration sent out an all-staff email about locker security and student accountability. Teachers made passing comments about respect and community conduct, though no one ever said anything directly. The school resource officer visited a few classes, giving dry talks about responsibility that made most students completely zone out. But Jamari saw through it. They weren't really trying to solve anything. They just wanted to appear as if they cared, as if something was being done. In reality, they were just covering themselves. Nobody wanted to admit that a kid had outsmarted his bullies right under their noses. He watched it all unfold like a movie he'd already seen. The real change wasn't coming from the front office. It was happening in the hallways. People started treating him differently. Not like a hero, not like a threat, just different. More eyes met his when he passed. Teachers asked if he needed help with assignments. Students who never spoke to him before now nodded at him in the halls. Even the lunch lady, Miss Linda, slid him an extra juice on Thursday and whispered, "You good, baby?" with a smile. He just smiled back and said, "Yeah, I'm good." At home things stayed normal. His mom kept packing his lunch, but now Jamari carried it with him. She didn't know what had happened, didn't need to. She was just happy he seemed less withdrawn, more present. She even joked, "Someone finally noticed my turkey sandwich skills, huh?" He laughed, real and warm, and said, "Something like that." On Friday, exactly 1 week after everything went down, Trent passed him in the hallway. No bump this time, no smirk, just eyes low, steps quick. Jamari kept walking. That same day, during study hall, Chad sat alone in the corner, headphones in but not really listening to anything. He looked smaller somehow, deflated. Jamari glanced at him once and then looked away. No need for words. He wasn't interested in gloating. He didn't need to say, "You deserved it." They knew. He didn't need to hear, "I'm sorry." They wouldn't mean it anyway. Justice, as he learned, doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it comes in silence, in patience, in a moment so sharp that the people who laughed at you now flinch at the thought of your name. Still, Jamari wasn't proud of what he'd done, not exactly. He didn't like that it had come to that, that he'd had to stoop low just to be heard, that no adult had stepped in, that he had to weaponize a sandwich to get peace. But at the same time it worked. And no one was stealing his lunch anymore. No one was treating him like furniture anymore. He mattered now. One day in art class, Miss Valdez stopped behind him while he was sketching something new. A boy sitting alone at a lunch table, but this time his shadow was taller than everyone else's. She looked at it quietly, then said, "This is powerful." Jamari didn't say anything, but he smiled. In that moment he realized something important, something he'd carry with him long after high school. Sometimes people don't see you until you stop playing by their rules. Not because you want to hurt them, but because they left you no choice. And once you've been invisible, there's power in deciding how and when you let them see you. Weeks passed, but the silence remained. No more missing lunches, no more crumpled napkins or sharpened notes. No more jokes whispered behind hands. If anything, the school had adjusted its rhythm around Jamari, like a river quietly rerouting around a rock that wouldn't move. And Jamari? He didn't change overnight. He still kept to himself, still preferred sketching to small talk, still chose the table by the vending machines. But now that table wasn't empty because he had no choice. It was empty because people respected the space around him. Sometimes another student would sit with him, never the same person twice. Someone needing quiet, someone who maybe knew what it felt like to be overlooked. He didn't talk much and neither did they, but those small, shared silences said enough. On a Monday morning, Miss Dorsey gave the class a journaling assignment. Write about a moment that changed how you see the world. Jamari sat there for a long time staring at the page. He could have written about the stolen lunches, the cockroach, the sick bullies, the way the school turned its head. But instead he wrote this: sometimes silence isn't peace. It's just a space waiting to be filled. People will take and take until you show them what it feels like to lose. I didn't want revenge. I wanted someone to see me. They didn't. So I made them look. He didn't put his name on it. He didn't need to. After class, Miss Dorsey stopped him by the door. That was something, she said softly. Was that yours? Jamari just shrugged. She smiled, not pushing further. Whoever wrote it, I hope they're okay. I think they are now, he said and walked out. The truth is, Jamari didn't feel like a hero. Heroes had fans. He didn't want fans. He wanted peace, wanted fairness, wanted what everyone else got without begging: respect. He wasn't proud of the cockroach, he didn't think that part was clever. But it was necessary. Because sometimes the system fails you, and when it does, you're left with two options: stay small or get creative. That's the lesson he took with him. That sometimes the line between justice and petty is thin. Sometimes the only way to get someone to stop hurting you is to make them feel something. Not forever, not to destroy them, just enough to make them remember. And Trent, Chad, and Bryce? They remembered. He didn't need them to suffer. He just needed them to leave him alone. And they did. More importantly, he didn't carry the anger with him after that. He let it sit in that hallway, in that locker, in that one Friday lunch. Because once you've stood up for yourself, really stood up, you don't have to prove anything anymore. And if you're listening to this, wondering what the point of it all was, it's this. You don't always get to choose how people treat you, but you do get to choose what you become in response. Jamari could have folded. Could have gotten bitter. Could have lashed out with fists or rage. But he didn't. He was strategic, patient, thoughtful. And when the moment came, he made a decision that changed the way his world looked at him. You might be the quiet one. The one who eats alone. The one nobody notices until something goes wrong. But you still matter. Your voice matters even when you don't speak. And one day the people who ignored you may end up telling stories about how they used to know you, and how they learned a lesson the hard way. The truth is, Jamari's story isn't rare. Not because everyone out there is hiding bugs in sandwiches, but because too many kids are walking hallways they don't feel safe in. Too many are learning to hold in their hunger, their anger, their words, because speaking up doesn't always get results. It gets them labeled, ignored, pushed aside. But that doesn't mean they don't have power. Jamari didn't win because he made someone sick. That's not what this is about. He won because he took back control of a situation that was robbing him of dignity day after day, bite by bite. He didn't yell. He didn't throw punches. He waited. He watched. And when the time came, he made a decision that forced people to stop seeing him as a target and start seeing him as someone who could push back. Not violently, not recklessly, but with enough precision that it made people think twice. That's the real story here. It's not about a prank. It's about how silence can become a form of resistance when no one else is listening. And it's about what happens when the quiet kid, the one everyone thinks will never fight back, finally does. You never know what kind of war someone's fighting when they sit alone at lunch. You never know what they've held in, what they've swallowed down, how many times they've opened their locker just to find an empty space where something they cared about used to be. And most of the time they won't tell you because the world teaches them not to. The world tells them to be strong, to ignore it, to just eat earlier. Like Jamari was told, to adapt, to shrink, to wait. But what happens when they've waited long enough? What happens when being polite stops working? Jamari's story isn't about revenge. It's about visibility. It's about respect. About forcing the system and the people in it to take notice. Because when kids like Jamari finally act, they don't do it for fun. They do it because no one left them any other option. So if you're watching this and you're a teacher, a parent, a classmate, pay attention. Listen better. Look harder. Don't wait until someone has to make a move to get your attention. And if you're someone like Jamari, quiet, overlooked, underestimated, know this. You are not powerless. You are not invisible. You don't have to become like the people who hurt you, but you also don't have to sit back and let them. Find your way to speak, even if it's not with words, even if it's through action or art or silence that's loud enough to make them rethink everything. Because sometimes the smallest actions cause the biggest shifts. Jamari didn't ask for a spotlight, but he made damn sure no one would forget him again. If this story made you think, made you feel something, or reminded you of someone in your life, leave a comment. Let us know what you took from it. And if you've ever had to fight your way out of silence, we'd love to hear your story. Hit subscribe because the voices no one wants to hear, those are the ones we're giving the mic to.